Should the legislature put a bounty on the heads of immigrants? They're thinking about it. We'll talk with a member of the Republican leadership. One lawmaker wants to change the name of an Arizona highway to honor Donald Trump. But do they even have the power to do that? And hundreds of bills are moving at the state capitol. We'll look at a few that might make it to the governor's desk tonight on Politics Unplugged.
Good evening, I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged, and one of the big focuses of this year's legislature is on illegal immigration. The governor has signaled that she's willing to get tougher on immigration, but will she find any agreement with the Republican majority? Here to talk about that is House Senate Pro Tem TJ Shope. I want to thank you very much for being here today, and let's talk a little bit. Let's start with this, what's being called the bounty bill. This is a bill that was offered by Senator Jake Hoffman, and essentially what it does, it offers police agencies, not the police officers personally, but the agencies, $2,500 for any arrests of undocumented migrants that leads to a deportation. Your thoughts on this? I mean, there are an estimated 230,000 undocumented migrants living in Arizona. Your thoughts on putting essentially what people are calling a bounty on their heads?
Well, I think first off, we've had a lot of immigration bills that are out there trying to tackle illegal immigration. We know that the governor has for some time signaled that she is willing to be tougher than she has been over the last 2 years. Remains to be seen. However, I think what Senator Hoffman is obviously trying to do is offer another option in the toolbox for folks to take a look at. Senator Hoffman represents one of the most conservative districts in the state of Arizona. I think that in his district, it's probably something like this is probably A-OK. We haven't taken a temperature. We just had the bill in committee this past week of the rest of the caucus to see where they are. That'll come in the coming week. So yet to be seen on that particular bill. But overall, this legislature is going to send some bills to the governor's desk that will test whether or not she's actually telling the truth about wanting to be tougher on illegal immigration.
Yeah, and I get that the Republicans coming into the year very emboldened with their agenda on immigration. I mean, what we saw was voters overwhelmingly supported the Secure the Border Act that went to the ballot to them. We saw the election of Donald Trump here in Arizona, across the country, who ran on a Get Tough immigration platform. But this is one of the more aggressive, if not the most aggressive, immigration bill that I've seen since covering the legislature. What's the conversations in the halls right now in the Senate? If it gets to a floor vote, is this going to pass and move over to the House?
Well, we have to go through some more hoops in the Senate before that bill would even be brought to the floor. So it has to go through the Rules Committee. I know that some people have brought up constitutionality of the bill, so that remains to be seen. Those discussions will transpire, but we do have any number of other bills that are making their way through the legislative process, and this will be a upcoming week of lots of bills going through that Rules Committee, lots of bills going through the caucus discussions, and coming to some form of unanimity of where we're going to go ahead and go with immigration overall. And I think you'll see some bills that'll make it up to the governor to see where she is on the issue.
And obviously we saw in committee during the debate over that bill, you weren't in the government committee, but we saw a debate in that. And obviously the immigration activists were out there really, urging everybody to vote against this. The people we didn't see testify in committee were the people who would be directly affected, other than the immigrants, the police community. Sure. There were no police agencies that went out there and made any case for or against this bill. And in fact, only one, the Arizona Police Association signed in against this bill. What are you hearing from law enforcement about this? Do they want this? Because the Phoenix Police Association said that they don't want to put their officers in a situation where they're trying to monetize policing in Arizona.
Well, I think, overall, where I've heard the law enforcement community on things right now has been just on the broader issue of immigration enforcement, on securing the border, making sure that law enforcement officers are able to do their job, as many feel that they haven't been able to do their job over the last handful of years. So that's where a lot of the conversation is. On that particular bill, we're going to have those discussions going on this week. We're still very early on in the legislative session, so I would have to take a wait and see type of attitude there. But I do know we're going to have some big illegal immigration bills aimed at curbing immigration, aimed at curbing drug flow into this country on the governor's desk very soon.
Okay, and let's talk about one of those right now. Senate President Warren Peterson's got a bill, the so-called ICE bill, and he would require that local law enforcement cooperate with the federal government on that. There's been a lot of pushback, obviously, from the other side on that. Where's this bill heading?
Yeah, so I like to call it the Peterson-Shope bill because we're the two sponsors on it. But
don't want to short you on that.
Exactly. But the reality is, look, we have heard the governor say over and over again that she wants to be tougher on the immigration issue, on drugs coming across the border. However, every time that we've sent a bill up to her desk, it's been vetoed. So this is just another opportunity to say, look, at bare minimum, are we going to have our local law enforcement officers cooperating with the federal government in what Tom Homan is doing at Border Patrol and what the Trump administration is doing overall vis-a-vis the border. So that is, to me, it's a real bare minimum type of bill. If you're serious about tackling the issue, then this is one that should easily get the governor's signature.
And we've been hearing the criticisms, though, if the bills like this, like the bounty bill, these pass, it undercuts the trust in communities between the people that are being policed and the people, and the law enforcement officers out there. What do you say to that? Because what we're hearing from folks is if bills like this pass, there's a lot of people who live in these neighborhoods, these areas with a lot of Hispanics, a lot of migrants. They're not going to cooperate. They're not going to step forward and report crimes or act as witnesses because they will fear that they will end up being deported.
Right. So I hear that often. I push back on it pretty heavily. If you look at our law enforcement agencies across state, especially in the county that I represent in Pinal, the demographics of these law enforcement agencies pretty much reflect the demographics of the communities they serve, especially if you look at Pinal County Sheriff's Office, where we have a new sheriff in Ross Teeple, who took over from Mark Lambert. These communities will be kept safer by enforcing the laws that are on the books and having our local law enforcement in an assisting role with Border Patrol and ICE. If you look around at who they're rounding up, I would be actually more embarrassed to be on the side of the folks who are in committee defending the rapists, defending the people who are going out and assaulting people that have rap sheets a mile long. That is embarrassing to me, not going out and protecting our law enforcement community and protecting the neighborhoods that they serve.
Okay, let's move on now to something that's a little more personal for lawmakers. What we saw over in the House the other day, we saw a bill move out of committee in the House. Could be headed to the Senate. We don't know that yet. And so a bill that would limit legislative immunity. Right. Currently, according to the Arizona Constitution, you are immune from arrest, and with very few exceptions. Those exceptions being breach of the peace, felonies, and treason. And what we've seen over the past year, 3 lawmakers try to use legislative immunity to get out of a speeding ticket. This bill would do that. It would add speeding tickets to those exceptions on legislative immunity. So lawmakers could not get out of those types of infractions by invoking that clause in the Constitution. If this makes it out of the House, there's a question of whether or not it's ever going to get heard in the Senate. Do you want this bill to be heard in the Senate if it gets out of the House?
Look, I sponsored a bill or a resolution to repeal legislative immunity about 5 years ago. We had a DUI issue.
After Ducey called for he signed his executive order.
Correct, yes. And so, look, I think that we should follow the laws that the state of Arizona has, that everybody else has. Now, one thing I will say is that I've talked to officers. We have, troopers that are often at the Capitol, or deputies, or law enforcement officers. The reality is that we go into these situations, there's no immunity anymore. You get treated like an average citizen. That doesn't mean you get a ticket every single time you get pulled over. That could mean discretion, which is something we often like to promote as an officer's discretion into circumstances of why something may be happening. That just means that you're like every other citizen. I have no problem with the bill. Obviously, I sponsored a resolution to do away with it prior to, but it remains to be seen if it even gets out of the House.
One of your Republican colleagues in the House during committee who voted against sending this bill to the ballot, because it would require voter approval because it's a change in the Constitution. And he said that now he believes is the time to actually strengthen legislative immunity, not weaken it. Do you care to respond to that?
I don't know what the context of that is. However,
He believes that the AG is weaponized her office.
Oh, well, there's no doubt that the AG is weaponized her office. But, the reality is that we're talking about instances that seem to be officer pulls somebody over for a traffic infraction, if that's what the bill is intending to do, and I've spoken to Representative Nguyen about it, then it seems like it's going to be very narrowly tailored.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there. TJ Shope, thank you very much for stopping by here. And still ahead, the legislature is thinking of renaming a highway after Donald Trump. But do they really have that authority? We'll take a look at that when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. Lawmakers are considering whether to rename a highway as the Donald J. Trump Highway. But even if they can agree on this, it's not that easy.
Donald Trump made waves last month after he renamed the Gulf of Mexico.
For the first time in history, flying over the recently renamed Gulf of America.
Republican lawmakers now want to rename part of Arizona after him.
Unbeknownst to me, this has received a lot of national notoriety. Just little old Rogers putting this out there.
State Senator Wendy Rogers is the author of SCM 1001 that would designate State Route 260 the Donald J. Trump Highway. The scenic road starts in Eager and winds its way more than 200 miles west along the Mogollon Rim to Cottonwood.
All across the nation, people have really endorsed this concept. And why? It's because we, the people, should be able to name our roads and byways.
4 years ago, Rogers tried to rename the highway after Trump, but that proposal went nowhere. It's a different story this year. Last week, it quietly advanced out of a Senate committee with no pushback from the Democrats who voted against the measure.
And on a final note, it does not, I say again, it does not require the governor's approval. So this is we, the people, the state legislature, who are putting this forward.
Rogers is right about one thing. The Senate memorial does not need the governor's approval because it does not propose any change in any laws. But the final say does not come down to the legislature. That decision will be made by a little-known panel called the Arizona Board on Geographic and Historical Names. That means that after all this time and energy spent on renaming the state highway after Trump, it could all be pointless.
And let's bring in our panel and take a look at all of this. And this Republican consultant, Marcus Dellartino, and Democratic consultant, Matt Grodzki. Thank you guys for joining us here today. What's going on here? We've seen, these name changes there on the federal level. We're seeing it now here in the state level. Wendy Rogers is now her second attempt to try to rename the Donald Trump Highway. Apparently she doesn't know or wasn't aware that it's not that easy to do in Arizona. We learned this a few years back when we renamed Piestewa Peak, didn't we?
We did. Yeah, that was a fun one. Do you remember that? So we had a renaming of Piestewa Peak, but the process that went through had some political landmines involved in it, is the nicest way I can put it. And so we've redone the way that we actually name these. And then that came up again on the naming of a mountain in the West Valley more recently, a couple years ago. For a fallen Navy SEAL that came from Arizona. And so the process is quite a bit different today than I think people remember it prior to that point.
And talk to me a little bit about the symbolism here. I mean, obviously that part of the state, if you look at the election results, that's a part of the state that is ruby red. I mean, if you go through that area, you're going to find a lot of Trump supporters. In fact, I think the Trump store is actually on State Route 260, so you can go buy all your Trump gear there. But talk to me a little bit the significance of the symbolism.
Sure. Symbolism, maybe the highway will come with a bootlicking overpass, right? I mean, I just think that at the end of the day, it is purely just to suck up to the president. They're trying to score political points. And I think those folks in opposition to it need to stress that by and large, this is not what voters send people to the legislature to do. They're worried about real issues, and having this fight is just one of the many reasons people don't like politicians in the ledge.
Yeah, and it does kind of point to there is a lot of support. I've never seen this kind of influence from a president on the local level. I just spoke with TJ Shope, and we'll talk a little bit more about some of the immigration bills in the next segment. But it seems like the Republicans here really are taking the lead in trying to further the agenda of Donald Trump here on the state level. Is that correct?
I think that's fair to say. I'd just remind everybody, I mean, this isn't anything new. We name things after presidents all the time. If you look at the dams in Arizona,
yeah, but usually those presidents aren't alive, Marcus. Right. Let's be honest here.
Maybe not. I don't know when we named Roosevelt Dam. So, but you're most likely right. But But I don't think there's anything particularly new happening here. But to your question, to your point, are they taking sort of a cue from that messaging? Well, of course they are, and it's happening in every other red state in America. He won decisively. They know that, and they're picking up on that messaging.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, what can Democrats do on a messaging level when you're starting to see stuff like this happen?
Let's just talk about the absurdity of it. I mean, we were just chatting about it 10 seconds ago. The president is alive. He's currently in office. You don't generally do things like that until after they've left office, right? So I think that folks, by and large, swing voters can see that there's some heavy level catering going on to the president, and it's just a matter of time before voters get tired of it and actually want them to solve real problems. So that's how I would message it.
All right, well, let's take a quick break here and let's and continue the conversation here on the other side. And when we come back after the break, we're going to look at the rest of this week's major headlines, including hundreds of bills of the legislature that they'll be sorting through this session. That's all next on Politics Unplugged. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. This time of year, lawmakers are buried under bills to consider. So which ones actually have a chance to make it to the governor's desk? Let's bring our panel back in. Marcus Dellartino, Matt Grosky. Thanks for sticking around here today. Let's start, though, with a bill we just kind of discussed with TJ Shope. Let's talk a little bit about legislative immunity. That's a big issue these days. It passed out of the House committee. Do you think it gets out of the House? And the bigger question is, if it does get out of the House, will it even get heard in the Senate?
If I had to look at my crystal ball, Dennis, what I would say is that I think we're probably looking at an amendment, maybe in rules or on the floor, that it does get out of the House, but hits a huge brick wall in the Senate. And I think that that's probably where it dies.
What are Democrats saying about this bill? Because I have talked to some Democrats on, off the record about this, and they are concerned. Some of them actually think that you don't want to start limiting legislative immunity right now. What are they saying?
Well, I can reference what the AG has said publicly about it, and she had said she's in favor of it. I understand that there's going to be off-the-record conversations with people expressing concern, and that's why I think Marcus and I have the same crystal ball, where it does hit a brick wall, and unfortunately, I don't think it gets implemented. And that's a bummer, because I think a lot of people want to believe that nobody's above the law, yet we've got a situation in the legislature where you can get out of a speeding ticket, no problem.
And if it did get to the ballot, Marcus, it passes pretty handily, don't you think?
Yeah, that one's a no-brainer.
Yep.
It's going to fly through. And so they know that, and hence the reason it's going to hit a brick wall in the Senate.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about the big bounty bill that was issued, that advanced in the Senate this past week. Obviously, the governor is going to veto this legislation. She actually said, quote, there's no way in hell that she's going to sign this. So what do you think? Do you expect that Republicans then pivot and send that back to the ballot like they did last year with some of their tougher immigration measures?
It certainly seems to be their playbook. What they're trying to do is put her in a box by having this absurd legislation come up that she then has to veto so they can say she's weak on immigration. It couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, she's allocated $100 million to border security, I think $17 million to the SAFE task force, which I believe stopped some 8 million pills of fentanyl getting in last year. I think equally absurd, we should ask Hoffman if he wants a bounty hunter bill to stop people that are speeding. I mean, I think that would be just as much fun. So at the end of the day, it's a gimmick, right? They're just trying to get headlines out of it. And I think it's incumbent on Democrats to message that and make it clear what the governor has been doing on immigration.
Is this a gimmick, or are they really serious about trying to get this through? And do you think that the Republicans will try to put this on the ballot?
It seems to me like the major energy is behind the Shope Warren Peterson bill on immigration reform. 1. 2, strategically, I would urge those guys to hold on ballot initiatives until next year when you have a framework of what you want to put on the ballot against this governor. 3, I would say, I hate to break it to everybody here, but we don't have as much money as people think we do. And if you're a state legislator, let me be the first to tell you that surplus you heard about in January is diminished quite a bit. So there is some fiscal ramifications of this bill. And I think that with what the Trump administration is doing on a federal level with Homeland and ICE, I largely think that this problem is going to be solved more on a federal level than spending state resources on on furthering that issue.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the politics with the Democratic governor. She's obviously made it clear, not just signals, she has tried to convince people that she is going to be tougher these next couple of years when it comes to immigration. I mean, again, you can't stress this enough. A week after the results of last year's election, her first appearance was down at the border in Nogales, sending a clear signal that she wants to get serious or tougher on the border. If the Peterson Shope bill makes its way to her desk, which I fully expect it will, does the governor sign or veto this piece?
I think we'll have to see when we get there. I mean, I think she's been, tough on immigration over the last several months. I mean, if you think back to when Biden was president, she was at odds with him on some of those things, which, made some Democrats upset, right? So I think she's going to continue to do that, continue to make the investments that she's already done. But it remains to be seen what that final bill is going to look like and what she decides to do.
Yeah, what's the political risk if she does veto a bill like that?
Well, then she's soft on immigration, right? That's what Republicans are going for. And they are doing a great job at pinning her down on making a bunch of things that need to be vetoed, which continues this messaging of I'm the veto queen governor. And what we've talked about for the last month or so is how does she break out of that messaging to be the governor that I want a strong education system that does this. I want a strong healthcare system that's able to do this and take care of kids at home, et cetera, et cetera. But get off that dialogue, that message point of I'm the veto.
And I think that's where the onus is on Democrats. As the Dem consultant at the table, I think Dems could do a better job across the state trying to come to her defense on those particular issues so she doesn't have to be the sole messenger on those points.
And do you see this as part of the whole overall strategy coming from the Republicans to try to send her as much legislation as they can for her to veto?
Absolutely.
I mean, what can she do differently? How can they message it? I mean, it's one thing to say they need to message this differently. What can they be saying?
Well, they need to talk about what her priorities are, what she's done in the past, right? And make it clear that she's not just vetoing things. She's being a bulwark against crazy, harmful legislation. But at the same time, call out the fact that they're playing games. Right? They're trying to do gimmicks. They're trying to get headlines. They're trying to distract, right? So Democrats need to be very overt in that messaging and share that with the broader public because the public doesn't have time for that and they're not paying attention at that level.
All right, let's talk about another bill that's got a lot of attention this past week, and that is how we conduct executions in the state of Arizona. And now some guy wants to do this, wants to be able to do this by firing squad, because currently we do the lethal injection method. Where do you see this bill going? I mean, personally, I look at this, I look at the dynamics and what and the people down at the legislature. I think this gets through. What does the governor do?
Well, the governor's going to veto that bill, I believe, but it is absent of this discussion. We're having a greater argument or fight over access to those drugs that we use for intravenous death penalty cases. And so this is a solution to get out of that sort of quagmire, if you will, involving that. And so other states have taken it up, other states are debating it, but I would assume that this governor would probably veto that bill. But I do agree, I think it would get through.
Yeah, do you agree with Mark, so the Democratic governor on this? Would veto or sign this legislation? Again, it's another one of those bills. If she vetoes something like this, I mean, who knows what the message is going to be?
Sure. I think 30,000-foot view, my guess is yes, it's probably a veto. I do think that while it's an important issue and other states are having the debate, if you look at polling, you look at the conversation, you look at the electorate the last several cycles, this particular issue on executions and how they're conducted, it doesn't rise to the same level as other things. So I think politically, if she does veto it, sure, the Republicans might try to use some talking points, but it's not something that sticks long term, especially in a re-election cycle.
All right, going to have to end it there. That is all the time we have, but be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.